How Shakespeare came into your life, when you just kind of first conscious of Shakespeare plays, and were they important in your own career?
Okay. Shakespeare for me, growing up, was atrocious. I don't know. It was dreadful. In school, that horrible thing of having to read. It wouldn't be reading by parts, it would be reading by, you take the first 4 lines, you take the next 4 lines, it would be no, and a class full of kids with sweaty hands because they're scared to read this kind of language. So, Shakespeare for me, for the most part, from about 11 to 14, 15 was awful, absolutely awful, and something that I didn't feel related to me or something I understood until a touring company came and did a production of Romeo and Juliet, which is obviously the most accessible to sort of 14, 15-year-olds. That's when I suddenly went, wow. The language seemed to not be an issue. Seeing these characters and the richness of these characters come to life in front of a group of 15-year-olds who obviously like to, when they've got touring companies come in, make lots of noise, and literally you could hear a pin drop and captivated, and that is when I fell in love with Shakespeare. In fact, if he was around today, I might be married to him.
Well, mine was quite a conventional introduction, really. It came from my English literature teacher, Miss Mary Crosland, and I haven't seen her for over 20 years, but I'd like to give her a hug because she was not only a scholar, but she was really passionate about drama. I think she was a frustrated actress. And because I'd always done it from about the age of 5, and I was one of the few pupils in the school who had any interest in it other than meeting girls once a year at the school productions, we really made a strong connection, and she was my English teacher. And I guess around the age of 13, 14, we started to study our O-level, as it was then, that gives my age away, set textbook, which was the Scottish play Macbeth. We're not on stage, we're in a library. I can say Macbeth, which is still my favourite play. And see, I've cursed myself now. But yeah, basically, in a nutshell, she was the reason why she made it real for me. And she introduced me to the universal themes and stories and connected it to my own life and my own experience. So, of course, you have the story of this guy who is struggling with his ambition, with friendship and with betrayal. But that these were universal themes, and that our emotions and our experiences as human beings, what we struggle with, is universal, and that was the beauty of Shakespeare. So she showed me that. That was kind of the moment. I went on to play it at 16, and she was my Lady Emma. So she got to realise her ambition. When I heard the applause at the end of that performance, I played the Scottish King. When I heard the applause at the end of that performance, something happened. A penny dropped, and I thought, I have to do this for the rest of my life.
Hello. And when you started acting in drama school or professionally, what were your Shakespearean experience?
Funny enough, after that experience when I was 15, I asked my mum, this is when I got the bug actually, and I asked, drama and attention to kind of literature other than O-levels or GCSE was minimal, very fairly academic school. So I asked my mum, who was a struggling nurse, because I found a little place that did sort of drama that you had to pay. So I pulled out the newspaper cutting and said, Mum, would it be possible if I do this on a Saturday? And I could see that there was a fee. She said, leave it with me. She obviously tried to work out how she could pay for it. Then one morning, she literally said, okay, we've got an appointment with this lady, let's go. From that moment on, every Saturday, we looked at classics, we looked at poetry, and I started on the festival trail. So I can remember us being in the deepest, darkest parts of this country, doing festivals with other children, and myself and my little black family coming to watch me doing, whether it was poetry or, you know, I got to play ADM. Funny enough, I did Gower. And getting a little prize at the end of it, or not. But that is when I truly got the bug and thought, I need to do this. I mean, there were loads of obstacles against me, but I was like, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to at least try. So, yeah, I haven't done as much Shakespeare in my career as I would have loved, but that's a whole other story that we might touch on a little bit later.
Well, that story kind of resonates with me. I told a little lie there before. When I heard the applause when I was on stage playing the Scottish King as a 16-year-old, I thought to myself, I have to do this, but not that I have to live in this world, be in this profession. I wanted to be in the law, and it was only when, after my A-levels, I just discovered that I didn't want to go and study the law, so I wasn't sure what to do. So I ended up working for a couple of years, various jobs, telesales, bar work, horrendous stuff. But I ended up at Birmingham City Council working, and the whole office, it was a group of frustrated actors. And all we did was talk about films, talk about plays, and I was so adrift from it, but nobody had sat me down and said, you can do it. People will pay you to do this, and this is how. So our careers advisor was my chemistry teacher, and he had no understanding of it. So anyway, they convinced me to audition for the National Youth Theatre. So that was the moment when I went to the summer school. I got a place there, worst audition of my life, but they took me anyway, thank God. I ended up there that summer, and suddenly I was surrounded by people who I felt a kindred spirit with. And that was the moment when they started to say, oh, you do drama school, and then this happens, and then this happens. And there were all these plays and all these opportunities. And that's when the penny really dropped. So after that course, I decided to stay in London, and I auditioned for Lambda, which is where I met Karen. Karen was in the year above me at Lambda. And that summer was a crucial point in my life.
So is it slightly too short? Okay. And you kind of went into the AHRC quite young?
No, actually. My first job out of drama school, because I went the conventional route where I did theatre-related A-levels and then straight into Lambda as a little plump kid, where they were going, you're not going to get work. But actually, lovely Gisette Bushell-Mingo became my big sister. Along with someone else who you mentioned today, Mona Hammond, who played the nurse. My first job out of drama school was actually understudying Gisette Bushell-Mingo, who played Juliet opposite Damien Lewis, aka Homeland, as her Romeo, and Mona Hammond was the nurse. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience actually. I couldn't again believe I was being paid to do something I absolutely loved. And I've really forgotten what question you asked. I'm just rambling on. Oh, yes. So, years later I did all sorts of theatre, and I thought that's when I left Lambda, theatre was the way forward. I don't think TV was quite ready for me, casting-wise, whatever. Anyway, my first experience in the RAC was Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and Winter's Tale was the first. And I was absolutely chuffed to be there, because the amazing thing about the Royal Shakespeare Company is they actually give you classes, regardless of your age. It's about coming together as a collective and continuing to learn, because that's what being an actor is. So you don't get to a point of going, oh darling, I get paid, and that's it. You literally keep learning. So we had the best vocal coaches, warm-ups, physical warm-ups, using different disciplines. There was Alexander, which teaches you to sit correctly so you can breathe and belt out on a huge stage. It was just an amazing experience. So I bought a book called Summerfolk, which is a collection of little, not stories, but accounts from various actors and directors through the ages, talking about the history and what they felt. And one of the things that I was so chuffed at is I was on the same stage as those people we've talked about today. So before the RST was ripped down, I actually got to play on that stage. Not very big parts, but I was chuffed. It's like, okay, so we've got Paul Robeson who's been on the stage, we've also got Laurence Olivier. I'm on the same stage as these greats. Little old me, it's possible. So it was amazing, and then I went back and did some other sort of new plays for another season, but I haven't been back since. I'd like to do more.
As far as the RSC is concerned, I haven't worked at the RSC apart from doing a play reading a couple of years back of a fantastic play called Slaughterhouse. But I haven't worked there. I guess I'd like to, but it was my ambition. Throughout drama school and after drama school, it was what I wanted to do. And I might have lost my first agent because of badgering him to get me seen by them, which never quite happened. But it was, I went to Manchester actually. My first production out of drama school, I actually got kicked out of drama school. I left at the end of the second year without an agent. I went back to the National Youth Theatre. Sometimes things don't work out. And I went back to the National Youth Theatre, got my agent from playing Brutus in Julius Caesar that summer. So I got a year's head start on the rest of my year. And I did some telly. Ended up about a year later in a production of Julius Caesar directed by Robert Delamere, which is still one of the highlights of my career. Danny Sapani playing Mark Antony, extraordinary. Patrick O'Kane playing Brutus. It was a group of young actors just chomping at the bit, trying to make their way with the shared love of Shakespeare. And I was up in Manchester for a couple of years there, working in various productions, Chris Hunt at the Library Theatre. It's funny, because mentioning Damien Lewis, one of the highlights was, I don't know if it was 1995, Ray Fiennes played Hamlet at the Hackney Empire. I went to see it. Damien Lewis was Laertes, and he really made an impression. He had this shoulder length red hair, and he was this dynamic guy. That in those early years, just after drama school, that was my experience. I did pretty much back-to-back Shakespeare for a couple of years. So I had.
Did you play Laertes in Manchester? Is that right?
I did, yes. I played Laertes in Manchester. Stephen Mapes was Hamlet a couple of years later, but I went on to probably the highlight of my career is being in King Lear, which is the production of Ian Hung, Richard Eyre's production in '97. And that's the last Shakespeare that I did. But if I never do another, I'll hang my hat on that one.
Yeah, I mean, because you sort of invited us to ask, why haven't you done more Shakespeare? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, this is between us in this room, but I would love to do more Shakespeare. I suppose it's a matter of maybe making my own work. What I was finding without making this lovely thing that we've got here negative, was that I was asked to go up for kind of maid parts, and that's what I found difficult. Looking at this board, I feel inspired. I want to celebrate the work that's happening. And it's amazing because, we're looking at, we've talked a lot today about male actors because you've got one major Moor, if you will, in a Shakespeare play, Othello. But for women, it's a whole other struggle. I don't want this to sound negative, so I'm not going to start going, downwards, but I'm not prepared to go and play maids, really. No.
And that was built into Shakespeare, because Shakespeare had an all-male company.
This is another thing I wanted to say. So we talk about moving on, And, you know, you could get some purists, people who oppose, like, you know, some of the stories there where back in the day, you know, there were big oppositions to people like Ira Aldred or Paul Robeson, or even some of these guys who really came against opposition. But you look at Shakespeare as a playwright. In his day, there were men on stage. It was unthinkable to have women playing female parts. You had young boys. Haven't we moved on? So there's that whole thing about going, let's move it on. If you were alive, you'd be like, let's rock. My plays are on everywhere. You know, it's that thing of let's keep it moving. Shakespeare's about human beings, the human condition. Are we not all human beings, regardless of what you look like, what colour your skin is, and that's what I want to see. I want to see, and I'm not even talking about colourblind casting, inverted commas, or anything like that, but I just want to see when people are playing people because they're the best person for that part. Where they're showing me and touching me because they're the best person for that part. I'll step down from that.
No, I concur. You're absolutely right. And the thing for me is, and I don't want to get negative either, but I think, you know, we're all here with a shared love of Shakespeare, and we're here to talk about our experience as professional actors. My experience has been, it's more difficult now to come across opportunities as, you know, as a male actor, as somebody with a whole plethora of great parts supposedly in front of me to play. It's more difficult for me to envisage myself playing the parts that I wanted to play just after I left drama school now than it was X number of years ago. When I played Laertes, my sister, great actress called Verity Hewlett, played my sister. A Caucasian girl, a white British girl. It was not an issue, it was not mentioned, it was not a deal. And it seems to me that quite often there needs to be a justification for the ethnic mix of a play. I loved being in that production of King Lear that I talked about, but I question whether I would have been cut. He wanted an otherness, Richard, for the actors playing the parts. They were from elsewhere. And, you know, you have all black productions and they're set in certain places and certain times which justify the inclusion, whether it's to do with the accents, whether it's to do with actors being of a certain ilk, etc. And I would just like to see more of what Karen describes. It's not that we want people to forget that we are black. It's about trying to find the best person for the job, because I think we underestimate our audiences.
And also to tell incredible stories. That's it, really. It's telling the story. Boom.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely right. And the frustrating thing is that you feel a little bit as if you have to wait for an opportunity, for somebody to have an artistic vision which includes the black in order to justify your existence on stage, as opposed to saying, a phone call from your agent, from the casting director, send me your best person. Do you see what I mean? I would like that opportunity. It's not to say that I wouldn't be in the mix to do that, but not for the sake of it. That's what I find frustrating.
I think that's probably a good place to throw it open to you. Any questions that you've got either immediately out of this or from earlier in the evening?
I'm going to ask a question purely to be provocative, but I'm interested in the response. I'm interested in the idea that, and I understand the whole point about colourblind casting. So my question is, how then can we then protest when a white actor is cast as a fellow?
Shall I go? By its nature, if you cast a white actor in Othello, it is making a political statement. The very fact that great black actors of the past were actually excluded from playing a black role in the play. It's like my great friend Joseph Marcel said, the play is not Iago, the play is Othello. It is about a black man. So all this stuff about colour doesn't matter, race doesn't matter. Of course it does. It's at the very centre of what makes the play tick and what makes the play work. So, that play in particular, with them all, he's got to be from elsewhere. He's somebody who is a brilliant man in a society that's not ready for him to be so. He's black for a specific reason, and I think Shakespeare, to take that away, I think by blacking up, there's this whole thing I saw a great documentary about Scott Joplin recently, and the context of the minstrel show and what all that was about. It's all connected in very murky territory. It stretches back a long time, and it's about the connotations and the symbolism behind that. So I believe that it should be played by a black person, and I stand by that personally.
It would be like having a play about Rwanda and it not being about what we know that's about. That's all.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. It's a very valid question to raise, and there would be people amongst our profession that sit here and say, of course it can be done. Great actors, Donald Sinden, all these great actors that have come before have blacked up. But it's about symbolism, it's about politics.
And he just said a key thing, they blacked up. So the point of the actual plays is about them all. If it didn't matter, then they wouldn't have to black him up. There was a production somewhere, and you probably know this because you're an expert, but it was the other way around. What was that?
Patrick Stewart in the States. So he was the one white person in a black community. So that was an experiment.
Yes, of course.
And I think what the point to make is that theatre is a place of pretense. Anybody can do anything. We've got a friend, Nick and I, who was running the first Shakespeare Festival in Harlem at the moment in New York. And the climax of that is going to be an all-female Othello. So yeah, you can shake up things, you can create possibilities, you can play on the audience's imagination, you can contradict what they think, and that can be fruitful. But I do think there's also a political thing of ownership. If there were so few roles which even today are cast that way, to take them away is a political action, which is in a way provocative too.
Yeah, and there are layers of discourse underneath that are perhaps unintended, but in actual fact detract from the, you would say, the strides that we have made since the days when black people physically could not. When you took your life into your hands, if an impresario put on a show with a black protagonist. Paul Robeson, which we get from this wonderful reading that introduced me to Tony, that Tony put together, this transcript. Paul Robeson was petrified to go near Peggy Ashcroft in 1930 as Othello. As the woman's husband, Peggy Ashcroft thought it was nonsense, and she thought it was very sad. And there's rumours of them having an affair. I won't go into that. That's not my territory. But they had a very strong relationship. But in 1930, he had this conditioning, which made it difficult for him to experience the role as Othello because of all the layers of discourse that were there about a mixed-race relationship, going near, touching a white woman, kissing a white woman. So that's what it's all about.
A question over here?
Isn't this just the same as all minorities in theatre though? Like, gay people is played by straight people, and Shylock should surely be played by a Jew. That's the question we should be looking at. It's a much bigger picture.
Yeah, that's why I was saying the right person for the job, initially. The right person for the job. But whether it's gay people...
It becomes tokenism, doesn't it, with theatres? That they will they will do blind casting, and they'll just have a black person because we need a quota of black people, or we'll have an Asian person. So it isn't necessarily the right person for the job. I think we need to be much more open about the way we look at it, right across the board.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think that does happen, where you do get this sort of token, And I'm not saying I agree with that, I'm saying it should be, shouldn't we be looking at trying to cast people who have got the qualities of the character that can touch you.
But in order to do that, you also have to take into account that if you do a play, then you need those people to look like they belong to a particular family. You can't just have, you know, I went to see a production of Romeo and Juliet, not Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream, where Hermia was black. And it's just like you suddenly have this kind of one person that doesn't look like she belongs to that family. It would have been much more imaginative for the director to kind of cast right across. But of course, she was just that token actress.
You see, but she might not have been. He might have cast her because she was good. I also saw a Midsummer Night's Dream recently, the Michael Grandage one, where Homie's dad was black. Okay, he's black. Boom, move on. Great play. It was one of those things where I didn't think about it. She, you know, he was good, she was good. It was a riot. Boom, the end.
Yeah, it's a very complicated area. You can have colour-blind casting, you can have colour-specific casting. So, for instance, James Earl Jones is now at the Old Vic playing Benedict in Much Ado. Mark Rylance decided it would be very, very logical to set it during the Second World War, that he's a black soldier, and it's a platoon of black soldiers who are based in England. But equally, you can go in other directions. And every production can make a different choice. I was involved a little bit with the Young Vic Hamlet a couple of years ago with Michael Sheen, where Laertes was played by an Oriental actor, and his sister by a black actress, and the dad was white. Doesn't mean anything. It's fine. It's purely casting for talent. Obviously, we live in a society where these things get noticed rather more. And in fact, the reviews of the Chinese actor were abusive. His race was never mentioned. It was simply said that he can't speak very well. But when you see 4 or 5 critics from certain identifiable newspapers saying the same thing, you know, there's something going on there. So this kind of casting will always challenge people. But then equally, there's a kind of stereotyping that often takes place when, going back to the 1960s, and it's still true now, you'll say, oh, let's do the Scottish play. Let's have a black actress or 3 playing witches, because in some way that's sort of appropriate. So these are never going to be easy issues. What's important is that they get addressed all the time. So I think a lot of people that we've talked to over the last year have said, yeah, it was great in the 80s, it was great in the 90s, it's kind of slipped back a bit now. And a colleague has done a statistical survey which said that at the Royal Shakespeare Company, for instance, for the last 20 years, there's been a numerical ceiling of the proportion of coloured artists, i.e. Asian or black, who are in the company. Mm-hmm. So there is some door in people's minds, I think, that needs to be opened a bit more.
Yeah, and another thing is, more often than not, Shakespeare's performed on the stage where it's a play. I've played a horse. I've played a unicorn. And I'm hoping they will.
That's what's going on.
It's a play. So Warhorse, we can see the operators of this thing. We go, and we're kids again, where it's like make-believe. When you were playing in the playground, did you go, oh no, you can't do that because you just do what you're doing. It's a play. So you go in, you sit down, it's not like TV, this is what separates it. Not only do you get a live experience, but you get to play make-believe. So there's that person in the puppet, but the puppeteer's behind. After 2 minutes, you don't see the puppeteer, you see this puppet who becomes alive, it's a play. And that's, you know, that's
Another question?
When you talk about feeling that it's gone backwards over 20 years, can you pinpoint why? You seem to be talking about, I wonder if you're talking about a level of decision making, about, you know, is it directors, is it politicians, you know, what's going on, do you think, at that level that actually comes out in this change? Say something like this, because we talk a lot about actors, but what about the directors, the people who own the theatres? Yeah.
Could I answer very briefly on to you, because you know much more? I've talked to directors who do not run companies, And they say the same things as actors are saying, which is that there's a kind of sense in which once you've achieved something, it's happened. You don't have to feel, and in fact it's very difficult to feel, that you have to keep on fighting the same battle all the time. So complacency is the real issue, I think. And again, this thing about the elasticity of time. Oh yes, Hugh Quashie played played Hotspur. So colourblind casting can really operate at the highest level of a company, even in a historical play. But then you don't notice how many times that has been repeated. And you tend to find that when a production is revived and recast, the same number of ethnic quote, actors play the same roles because they've reached their quota, and let's repeat it. So people need to be just tested and pushed a little bit more, I think. But that has to happen in the casting and at the producer level.
Yeah, I agree with Tony. Complacency it's a very dangerous thing. I mean, if you look not only at theatre but also at television, it's more crystalline there. There's also a risk, the relationship with risk, and people running businesses and not wanting to cause offence, etc. So making decisions very carefully about these sorts of areas, making or building justification into the artistic framework in that sense as well. I think that may be something else that's going on, but certainly it's a very different world from when I was coming up. When we were at drama school, there were already people like Adrian Lester, Patson Joseph. These are established names then, but they were becoming established back then for playing Rosalind, playing these great roles, great actors as they were. I think it's getting worse than it was. I just don't see how the actors starting their careers now can see opportunities that I could see for myself and that I exploited in the mid to late 90s. I'm not sure if those opportunities are there in the same quantity. That's my assessment.
Also, if I actually knew what the decision-making process was, that would be great. I wish I knew. I have no idea.
Maybe the answer is to get more directors, black directors at places like the National.
Yeah.
And then you would maybe get more black actors getting more work.
In the early days when the BBC, for example, cut Fluella out of the production because the lighting designer couldn't be asked to design the lighting. So, you know, there are a lot more there are a lot more opportunities for black actors now than there was when I started, for example.
Yeah, for instance, last week in Manchester, Tallow production, Arthur Miller play, black cast, director says, people have asked me what's the motivation for changing the race of these characters. There is no motivation in the play, it's just a good chance to get some good actors playing great roles. So absolutely, I think that's why the importance of Tallow was something I wanted to stress back in the 80s, and also why that's a continuing thing, that you must have directors from every background as well as everything else. And thankfully we seem to be getting away from the idea that theatres are run by men from Oxbridge.
And there was also the plays written by black playwrights about our stories. It's fine doing Shakespeare. I've done 3 and I hated them all. I don't like Shakespeare. I don't like it. And I did 2 at the Youngvic, and I did 1 in Norwich on tour. I don't like Shakespeare, okay? But it was good for my extension. I appreciated doing that. But I need to see, as a black person, I need to see more of my stories up there. I need to see the artistic commission commissioning good black plays. Not about the hood.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that one. I totally agree with you on that one. You see, the only place where I differ is Shakespeare's words are about me. Obviously, I'm not, the murderous Lady M or whatever, but I could have been that girl that, had fallen in love with somebody and had that language, had I had the vocabulary. That, the there are female characters and male characters in Shakespeare's, what's the word for it? Canon. That is my story. That's not my story, I can tell you that now. The yo in the hood, that's not my story. Exactly, I totally agree with you, and that's a lot what's been commissioned. But the only bit where I differ is some of Shakespeare's characters, some of the journeys that they take me on is my story. And I'm claiming them as somebody born and bred in this country, I don't care where I'm from or whatever, I'm a human being. These stories are about human beings.
Emotion is universal.
Exactly, that's why it's mine.
I need to see some of it from my perspective.
Oh, I completely agree, which is why if you had, and I'm not talking about, because what I find difficult also is when Nick was talking about a justification for having black or Asian characters in there. So I've had where I've gone for something, and it was actually a friend of mine casting, and he had voodoo business going on in his mind. So when I got the part, I was like, sorry, what did you want to do with this character? I was just thinking about, the costuming, bright coloured and voodoo. No, there's no reason for it.
But would that be from the perspective of the, people like ourselves becoming writers, of plays, that would be suitable, that have that kind of dimension, the same
And there are,
impact that Shakespeare has today, rather than trying to, look to the back. Yes, we look to Shakespeare or go forward to the future. That means that we become more innovative.
We have
this
many.
concept. And then maybe you, who can't last good roles, put pen to paper and then you writing. And then you can cast other people who are not getting that opportunity. How about coming from that perspective?
that's why I said make my own work. I mentioned that before. However, we have got a lot of fantastic young black and Asian writers coming up, fantastic, who hopefully in 100 years' time they'll be having discussions like we are now about the finite details of their work. There is a lot of great.
From somebody who's already on film, in the film, do you know what I mean? Like somebody, because you already have experience of that realm. You know that they
You
are.
see, my thing is, to be honest with you, is I lean a lot towards TV. That's where I've become as an actor. And I've got little things ticking away so that I'm not sitting here scratching my behind. I really am trying to be positive and make work. And make work that I would want to see that doesn't involve yeah.
And I say thank you for a brilliant conversation from two great people. So thank you. Keep your eyes open. See what's on out there. Go and see the stuff. Write the stuff. This is about multicultural performance, but actually it's about the multiculturalness of culture. We don't live in an either-or world. It's not Shakespeare or a modern play on a modern thing. We need a world where all these things bounce off each other, and Shakespeare inspires you to use the language of today more richly than anyone has ever done before. That's the idea. And as people have been saying, Shakespeare gives you stories which are universal. Write your own. But in the meantime, thank you very much.